Hi guys, welcome to part 4 of the Anatomy of Style in conjunction with ImagineFX magazine. Now, this week we'll be working with the male figure and we'll be exploring the rhythm of muscles, how they push together, how they move, how they create this beautiful wave-like action across the body. And the way muscles work is that they kind of have a similar shape on the borders, just like the continents of the world. In order for them to move together in union, the muscles have to be in some kind of rhythmic order. And they're also paired usually as well. The biceps and the triceps, as you can see here, they change shape. They're shapeshifters. And so when the bicep contracts, it only can contract. Muscles can only do one thing, and that's to get shorter. After that, they just return to their length. They can't be longer in any action. They just relax. And so as the bicep shortens, the tricep lengthens back to its original length. And as the tricep shortens, the bicep lengthens back to its original length. So they're antagonistic, which sounds like the opposite. They actually work together. And so the same with muscles all over the body, usually in pairs. You'll see them in the calves as well. So these muscles that we look at every day, we might see them but never really understand just how beautiful they are as they work together. So it's worth a study. And also with anatomy books, most of the poses are just straight up and down. It's not muscle in action at all. So if we just learn from anatomy books, we're just learning from muscles as really an empty vessel. And the minute the body moves, the muscles change shape. They shift and they become different shapes that are similar to their static nature, but enough for us to have to understand that studying just from staid poses in anatomy books will not take us much further than just stiff poses. The body in motion is where the gesture really starts to sing. Okay, with that in mind, let's get started. Okay, so here I am with my little 2-finger wide sharpened charcoal stick. You'll see me using this throughout all the workshops, and it's a beautiful grip that allows me to move around with freedom and make just the right size mark for this kind of size paper. If the paper is twice as big, I'd use twice as big a charcoal stick, 4-finger gap wide, and so on. So it's basically whatever is comfortable for the size of paper that I'm working on. Now you can see that I've started a little differently than usual. I'll usually start with the torso, which I'm just going to put in right now. But what I started with there was the length of the arms. I'm going to shorten the arms in this a little bit to get more torque. So as always, I'm not copying the reference, I'm interpreting it. But that envelope sweep that I'm putting in there from one arm to the other arm is to give me a good distance to work in, and also if you want to fit your picture on the page, which is the last consideration really, but for this we need to have it fit in so that you can see it on screen. For instance, it's at the max of my camera angle, so I had to plot this whole thing out. So there's more to it when I'm doing a demo than there is just casually drawing. I've got to consider a lot of things so that you guys can see what I'm doing. So here I am putting in the biggest, broadest shapes. What I've just put in there is the latissimus. Sorry, the trapezius. You'll hear me say that often. Latissimus and trapezius. I've got a little bit of dyslexia there. I don't know why. If you ever hear me call one the other, it'll be a good test for you to work out. There he goes again, Patrick's falling into the same trap over and over. So, working within these tubular distances, I'm trying to not think of the arm as separate parts, but as one unit all the way to the scapula. And the scapula I consider part of the arm. And the reason for that is I want to consider these muscles and bones and joints to not be separate things, but to be a continuous machine that works the body. And the arms are working everything, really. I mean, all the muscles in the torso are there to serve the arms. That's why we build chest muscles and back muscles, because we're lifting things with our arms and pulling things down with our arms. And so it works those muscles. So what I want is the absolute simplicity to begin with. And that's going to be the tubular, waist-wide shape of the torso. And then I can work out of that. I don't need to worry too much about the latissimus in this kind of pose, because as the arms come back, the latissimus starts to become more tubular, more waist-wide in shape. And as we pull the arms forward, the latissimus become more cape-like and get wider at the top. So in an arm pulling back pose, the latissimus don't show so much, and the figure becomes more feminine. And that's why you see in the bodybuilder poses, when they want to show their latissimus off, they pull their arms forward, and you get that V shape. So we're working with the tubular form here. So there's a lot of femininity in this pose, a lot of fluidity, and that's what I wanted. But in the pose, when I hit the pose, I think I went too much toward the feminine. And although it gives us a beautiful, graceful pose, I want to, in the spirit of what this theme is, which is the pearl fishers. The pearl fishers are pulling on ropes to bring in their catch. And for that we need a little bit more pressure on these muscles. So I'm going to pull in with the raised arm a little bit in my drawing. You can already see that in the drawing. And that'll flex the bicep a little bit more. So plotting things out. Now I always go for the heroic when it comes to a male figure, and you can see I've made the head small. And probably too small. In fact, definitely too small. But that's a better way to go, because a bigger than average head is going to look comical. So, but I think a bit too small there, almost superhero size. In fact, more so. So I'll make that head bigger. I'm already conscious of it, but I don't want to fiddle there. If I fiddle around with the head, I'll get too structural, meaning the drawing will stiffen up. So I want to keep this drawing as fluid as possible, and that means working with the longest lines possible. And I want to stay in that idea as long as possible. So gesture is king, and this is a supplement to the article in ImagineFX. So check the notes in there on this, and use this as more of a casual conversation with me as we come into the movie. It's an additional thing, really, but visually I can say a lot more as I'm drawing than on the written page. But the written page is a more documented idea, so you can refer to it more. So hopefully these two things together will be very helpful in getting the idea across of drawing being more than just a document. It's more than that. A photograph is a document, but in the hands of a photographer that's artistic, it's going to be a beautiful thing. But most snapshots we take are just documenting what we see. What an artist wants to do is document what he feels, what he or she feels as they draw, rather than just what they see. So if I'm only drawing what I see, we've lost the idea that an artist's idea is to interpret what they see. That wasn't too fancy, Mr. Fancy Artist, but it's true. It's not just a pose. The artist posing as an artiste. It is our job. Our job is to show our personal view of the world, and I try to do that through gesture and through omission, which is basically not putting in everything that I see. That's what the camera does. camera puts in everything it sees, makes no judgment. I want to make these muscles more fluid. If I feel, like I've said about the pose, being too languid, I want to tighten that pose up. Meaning I want those muscles to interact more and push against each other a little bit more. And to be fair, I probably take it too far and lose the gesture, the eternal battle of gesture and structure. And gesture is the king, but if you're too gestural, things can get floppy. And we've got to watch that. That's important. And so, let us see here where we're going. As far as the face is concerned here, I'm getting a little bit tight with it. And we don't want to stay in there too long because we'll be in structural hell. And we'll talk about the 3 hells in week 6. But we can touch on them here. And once again, if the gesture's too loose, the drawing gets floppy. If the structure's too tight, the drawing gets stiff. And so I'm very careful not to stay in that head too long. And I'm getting structural here. So I'm working with the small shapes inside the big shapes. Once again, working on what is actually the levator scapulae here. I know the broad area is the trapezius, but there's underlying muscles in there as well. And so these studies are terrific for, really wakening the artist up. We work with surface anatomy, and in the anatomical books it all looks very clear and simple-ish. But what happens is the muscles underneath start to engage as well, because the trapezius is actually quite thin in parts, as is the latissimus. And so there's muscles underneath, like that levitator scapulae. It starts to bulge and changes the shape of the trapezius. So these things can throw us off. And the scapula also are a tricky, very tricky bit of business. The scapulae, as they're known plurally. And you can see on the left the dimple is much higher than on the right. So treat this left and right business as the model is posing. We'll call the right arm. And from the back it is on the right anyway, so it doesn't confuse too much. So the left scapula is higher, and as the left arm, the straighter arm, is pulled toward us, that scapula gets pushed inwards, and so it starts to fade along the bottom part. But we still see the dimple. The dimple is caused by the trapezius crossing over and clipping the edge of the scapula top. And it acts like a quilted button, the same as does the sacrum at the bottom. As the hip bone presses in on its edge, it has that quilted button look too. So there's dimples in the back here that we can see very clearly. The dimples of the scapula at the top and the dimples of the sacrum at the bottom, very clear to see. We also get little landmarks like I'm working on here now, which is the acromion process. And that also presses inwards as the deltoid presses into it on one side and the trapezius on the other. And they create these lovely landmarks. So let's be aware of the rhythm again, which is what this whole thing's about. So you can see here on the long arm that the tricep is shortened. It's shortened because it's taking the pressure. I'm pulling the rope downwards on that arm, and so I'm using the back of the arm. The back of the arm is the triceps. Now if you see bodybuilders work out their triceps, what they do is they try and keep the elbow straight, or the joint of the top of the arm straight, and then they pull down with the forearm, and that isolates the tricep, and the tricep shortens. So muscles only shorten when they contract. They can't get longer. And so any muscle that's working is getting shorter. and that's why that tricep is pulled right up to the top in a lump like that. And what we end up with now is this beautiful rhythm coming down the arm, becoming the tendon, the common tendon of the triceps as it attaches to the elbow. And then watch what happens here as the arm presses in to all of that business that the scapula is attending to. The scapula has muscles coming off it all the way along the side there, further down than you would expect if you just begin in anatomy. Because underneath the scapula are the serratus muscles, and there's none of those, and they come out from under the scapula, and that's what makes the scapula float. The scapula is not actually attached as closely to the bones as other muscles. It's actually floating around so that it's independent. When I say floating, what I mean is there's muscle underneath then the bone and then muscle on top. And so it's more like a sort of buffer underneath there with all those muscles. And that means that the scapula, or scapulae, if you want to call them both as a unit, work independently, left and right, whereas the hips are fused. They can only tilt. The scapula can go in and out, as you can see there. One scapula is pushing into the body on the left, and another scapula is starting to push out toward us. We've all seen skinny kids push their scapula around until it looks like they have wings on their back. It's because their muscles aren't very developed. Whereas, I'm a grown man here, and my muscles are really starting to feel the pressure of those scapula. As I push that arm forward, the scapula is coming back, but instead of seeing pointed wing bones that we might see on a kid or a woman, a non-muscular woman will have very pointed scapulae. But you can see that the pressure of that right scapula is pushing into the rhomboids against the spine, and also the sacrospinalis muscles. They're pipes of muscle that run up the side of the spine. And if you look down where the pinch that I'm working on here now, that's where the pinch of the rib cage pushes into the obliques. If you look around about that area and go into the spine, and you can see that the spine starts to open up a little bit there. That's what Ray Bustos calls the pea pod. And that's where, on a thinner person, you'll see actual spine again. The sacrospinalis muscles are thicker on the top, and then that little pod opens up, and we start to see spine in there. But once again, on a leaner person is where you're going to see that. I'm a little thicker there. I've done manual labor all my life, even though I've been an artist for most of my life now. I sort of still maintained that idea of fitness that was born in me from working on building sites and in the Navy. And a lot of artists do that too. And I recommend that you stay as fit as you can as an artist, because we're very sedentary. And we sit at desks way too long. And on a health and safety aspect, they're a strange thing to say in a really very safe occupation. We can damage ourselves very easily from sitting too long. And I see it now in fellow artists. When I go to conventions, some of them are not too well because they haven't attended to their fitness. So even just standing up is not a bad idea, because you're not compressing everything in the center there. So once again, it seems like an odd thing to mention, but I think if you're just starting out, you're a young artist and you're not thinking about health too much because you're in good shape from just being young. It's really something to attend to. Keep yourself in good fitness. And we all know about the healthy body, healthy mind. It really is. It makes sense. Anytime that I've been out of fitness for even a short time, I can feel the difference in my mind as well as my body. Start to get a little foggy there. eating all that sugar and stuff doesn't do us any good. So, without being preachy, I don't want to, certainly never want to do that. Just from my life experience, try and keep in reasonable shape, and watch, watch those scales, and to keep in mind that you're in this for the long game, like I am, and I want to be painting and drawing for as long as I can. And when I meet the likes of Boris Vallejo, my absolute mentor and hero, he's kept himself in good shape all his life, and he's still painting at 80, coming up. He's not 80. Boris isn't 80, but coming up into that 8th decade, and he's still in terrific shape, and his work is as sharp as ever. And that's a good example right there. Okay, so let's have a look at these deltoids. The only reason I'm talking about all that is because we're talking about muscle and rhythm. And I love to look at anatomy, love to see it in motion. And muscles, even though we can think of that deltoid as an air balloon, hot air balloon as a basic shape, that's fine if the body's just not in motion, it's just standing still. Once it's in motion, then that shape, even though it maintains that kind of mnemonic shape, it will change in its interaction with other muscles. I mean, all these muscles that I'm drawing right now, and you can see I'm putting the shadow of the serratus in there, by the way. So if you're new to anatomy and you see these strange lines going down, you go, right, I can see the pinch very clearly. There's the 2 lines of the pinch. But above that, there's a shaded line as well. And on a leaner person, you'd start to see the serratus muscles. And the serratus muscles grab onto 9 ribs, and they look like ribs sometimes. So sometimes you'll see what seem to be double ribs, but one's kind of going up, one set, and the other set's coming down from it. And it's the serratus that are going upwards. So be very careful of those. So you can see now I'm working around the sacrum area. The sacrum's not visible on everyone. Once again, usually on a lean person, or just genetically. You don't necessarily have to be lean and have sacrum dimples, but mostly that's when we do see them. So I'm pushing in some core shadow here. And the core shadow is basically the corner of a form. That's why it's called the core. Well, I think so, anyhow. And you can see the barrel nature also of the rib cage going around the corner there. So, corner. So the shadows are a good way, not always, but to find the corners of things. I mean, every shadow is a corner of some sort, but it may not be the absolute corner, say, of the side of the body. Might be the corner of the sacrospinalis, but it's the corner of something, okay? And you see that I'm indicating some of the rhomboid muscles in there, being not as pressured on that side because the scapular blade is pushed inwards. It's on the right-hand side that we see the rhomboids really being pushed back, and that's the reason why I don't work with bodybuilders so much anymore. I'd prefer just a natural sort of look, and that's it's basically what I've done all my life is just been naturally kept fit. As I haven't ever taken steroids or any drugs. Don't do that, kids. I'm kind of joking there, but I've seen serious damage done to people that take drugs and think that they're doing well in their youth, and then shockingly bad results later in life. I remember one guy in London, he was on cocaine and drawing away every day. He was a terrific artist, and he just lost it. He's just full of nerves, trying to make money for his drugs, and just making error after error. Just an absolute train wreck. So don't do drugs. Let's have a look here now at the Electronon. Lovely name. I love the Electronon. Reminds me of Stingray and all those sci-fi puppet shows. The Electronon and Thunderbirds. Electronon is basically the elbow and all the stuff that goes on top of it. Little buttons of bursa and stuff. And And the olecranon is a great landmark to show the top and bottom division of the arm. Now the top of the arm is longer than the bottom. The bottom of the arm seems shorter, or sorry, the bottom of the arm seems longer because of the hand attached to it, and the fact that we pressure into the torso before we go on up to the deltoid. But if you go up, all the way up to the deltoid and down to the ulna or olecranon, it's actually longer. The way to work that out is to just bring your hand up, or you make a fist and just bring your arm up in a bicep curl to your shoulder, and see that the wrist is lower. And in this pose, because the arm is coming toward us at the top and slightly going away from us at the bottom, it seems longer on the bottom. So it seems like a very long arm, and really I should have shortened it a little bit, because, you know, my philosophy is if it looks wrong, it's wrong. If it looks right, it's right, even if it's wrong. So even though it is a very long arm there, I've let it go when I should have really shortened it to make it look right. So I'm using my fingers here just to smudge back, and as I smudge, I want to work with the form. I want to feel this as if it's three-dimensional. So as you can see me rubbing across the obliques there as if they're rounded. It may look at some points like I'm just going back and forth, but it's not true. So if you just go back and forth over the whole thing, you're not really feeling the form. I want to think like a method act here and feel the form, feel it as I go. Now at this point, I'm doing very well gesturally, I think, in the scheme of things. And later I will probably lose that, and that's why rendering is actually a problem. You'd hear me talk about the hells later, but render hell's the worst. The more you render, the more you lose sight of the gesture, and things get very stiff. Now that little corner box up there is my laptop. So I'm working with the, sorry, not laptop, iPad. So in the old days I would print out my photo reference, but today I just use the iPad, and it's just terrific. I'm in a bit of a disadvantage because I have to photograph this and film it, and so I can't have my head in the way. So I'm seeing a little bit of a parallax view. Parallax view is when you're not in sync with your surface. I'm not looking directly onto the surface, it's actually tilted away from me a bit. And that's when I wouldn't draw like that if I wasn't filming this. And but it's either that or my big head right there. So I'm not going to get that photo reference exactly anyway, even if that was the task. So ideally I would be standing up with no concern for cameras, and have my face parallel with the board, my body parallel with the board, and a figure in front of me parallel with everything. But everything's on the slant here for me, so you're going to have to forgive that. If things don't look the same as the photo, it doesn't really matter anyway, because it's not my concern that I duplicate the photograph. But there is definitely a little mismatch between me and the photo here. But once again, not a worry. In fact, don't worry about it. If you ever find yourself trying to copy the photo, you're actually in the wrong place. That should never be what you're doing. So working on the tricep here. I love the tricep. That little curve going inward there is the very reason why I treat the arm and the scapula as one thing. Because it really is. That tricep tendon is actually going between the teres major and the teres minor muscles. And just check out my book, The Anatomy of Style, for all these muscles and how they interact. Because it's just too complicated to go over in this, time. I could spend 2 hours just talking about the anatomy of the scapula. But we're talking about the drawing here and the rhythm of muscles. So always refer back to your anatomy books. And so that tendon is always, as it's attached to the scapula, going between those 2 muscles. I'm always aware of why it disappears for that reason. but it always has that lovely gestural curve to it as it goes in there. In week 6 we're going to work on this entire arm and scapula. It's so complicated. So we'll go back to that at that point. So you're not going to miss anything by me giving an overview of it here. It's so complicated. So that was the acromion process that I just marked in there. I'm just touching up in there again. I'm not saying the entire, whatever time I spent on this drawing, I think it would be 2 hours, something like that. We're getting the highlights of it. I don't want to bore you to death. As I'm drawing, it's fascinating to me, but it may not be so for such a long period. Unless you're really, an advanced artist that wants to hear all the minutiae that goes on in my fevered mind. Okay, now I'm working on the Serratus there. You saw me sweep in there. And this is me thinking of the rhythm. And this is danger area. When you start to render, you often lose the idea of gesture. But what I'm trying to do here now is balance the gesture and structure even as I render. Render hell is the worst hell. It's where most people phase out, and think of other things instead of what they're really doing here. And so it's really the most important part to keep your mind fresh, because it can very easily become not a chore, but like watching your washing go around. You're not thinking enough. You're not thinking like you should. And I'm thinking of rhythm as I render. It's very easy to just go back and forth with it. And what can happen if you lose sight of the whole thing again, which is what happens with render. You start working in parts and lose the idea of the whole thing. And the whole thing is the gesture, and the parts are the structure. So when you're in render hell, you'll almost certainly also be in structural hell. And that's why I'm moving all around this body rather than working from top left to bottom right. I want to feel the rhythm, and the way to feel the rhythm is to move across the surface. And if that sounds like too much hard work, it needn't be. And if you want to think of it like a dance, dancing's exciting, isn't it? And that's how I think about this. I'm dancing across the surface. And I want to go from one, move to another, one movement to another, just like a tango. In fact, it's very like that. It's very like a 2-step or 3 steps. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, a waltz. And I'm thinking of that rhythm as I go down. Even with the eraser here, I'm going from one spot to another. And usually from left to right, to left to right, and from top to bottom, rather than go left and right straight across like a typewriter, going left and then down to the right, and then down to the left, and then down to the right. It's a step down process. So most rhythm is going down the body. If you look at it and think of it like that, it's not really going across. At some point there it will, where there's pressure of the rib cage, then it's going across, but it's still heading downwards. Those 2 creases are still heading downwards in an S shape. So I'm thinking up to the top, down to the left, right, downwards all the time. And nature's like that. Nature's like that with everything. Waterfalls, going over rocks and stuff, you can start to see them splay out at the bottom in a motion that's very similar to muscles. Everything's trying to find its way to the bottom. And gravity is probably the main reason for that. Gravity is calling everything downwards. And that beautiful motion comes from gravity. Not entirely, but a lot. Okay, so, and that's why if you ever see someone upside down, how strange all the anatomy seems, as all the muscles and flesh gets pulled in the opposite direction that we're used to seeing. We're not used to seeing the cheek muscles go up into the eyes. We're used to seeing them coming downwards, especially on older people. But to see that turned upside down is an odd thing. Okay, so gravity is very important. In fact, it's worth drawing people upside down and in different positions so that we can see what gravity does to the figure. And it can give us some startling results and some scary results. So if you're drawing horror, you might want to think about that. Maybe draw a person upside down and then flip the picture over and show it from not upside down to see just how supernatural that looks. Okay, so here we are getting into the render of things, and like I say, it's a dangerous place. And you don't have to block everything and then render everything, which is not a bad method. Every method is doable. But once you get to the point where you've got all your structure in, that's why I've left that middle drawing. You can see all the changes that I've made as I go along. If I'd have just rendered where we were in the middle there, the head was too small, so I'm constantly adjusting as I go along. And that's why it's not a good idea to trace, all this photo bashing and tracing that we see going on. And it gives us results that look realistic. And if the canon is realism, then you're going to impress people. But you can only impress people for so long. And then, as we get more sophisticated and start to see art for what it is, which is expression, personal expression of an artist, you can still do realism, but it should have your impression in there. And if you're just tracing things, then you're just basically tracing on what a photograph has done. You're not giving an impression other than the impression of what the camera saw, which is no impression at all. And so every little micro change, every little micro decision I've made here has made this drawing separate from the photo. You might go, well, I prefer the photo, and to be honest, in a lot of respects I do too. But I'm in here for the long game, and whatever errors I make are learning experiences. If something doesn't work here, at least I tried. And if it's a failure in some respect, whatever that is, I don't see anything as a failure. It's all learning experiences. Then I'll know better the next time. But there's nothing that kills creativity more than the fear of failure. And so if we're frightened to fail, we will fail. And if we're not frightened to fail, then we're most likely going to soar in our art. And so it's an oxymoron, really, the fear of fear. There's nothing to fear. I mean, it's just a drawing, And the more you put that idea of everything has to be a spectacular drawing out of your mind, you'll actually end up drawing something maybe spectacular. It's all the opposite of what you would expect. So try not to fear the drawing. This has got to be my best drawing ever. It's probably going to be the end of the drawing. Whereas you go, I'm going to learn and enjoy this. And there's the secret. If you learn to enjoy what you're doing, the drawing will take care of itself. And they can't all be masterpieces, so keep that in your mind too. This is not one of my greatest drawings. And in my defense, I'm going to use a defense here. I've just come back from a month of not drawing, and that's a long time to not, and in fact, probably the longest period for me not to be drawing is a month. And I've been in the US for a month at a LuxCon, which is beautiful. It's wonderful to take a break and just enjoy life. We don't want to be hermits as well. And actually, when I came back, I was fresh wanting to draw. But my hand didn't feel fresh. So my mind's fresh, but the hand is rusty. And rust really sets in very quickly. Rust can set in a drawing hand within, a day. Take a month. Good Lord, I was frightened of this. I was frightened to come in and do this. Because I really didn't have any time. This drawing had to be done basically the moment I got back. So you get what you get with this drawing, no matter what was coming out of my pencil, it had to be what it was. I didn't have time to do another one or change it, or, you're getting basically a man under, not serious pressure here, but, there was no time to mess around here and try and find my feet. So as we go along, I'm obviously getting more confident again. But if this was, the fifth drawing I'd done this week, it would be really fluid and fast. But it's the first drawing in a month, and straight off the bat, So a tremendous amount of catching up with the gestural hand here. And a render study is not a good start for that. So the best I could do, and that's my advice to you, is if you're rusty, is before you attempt anything, major, do a lot of gestural drawings, and don't try and finish them. Do 10 or 12 or whatever you can, and just get your hand moving. And I did do that for this, but still, the rust was deep in this. So what came to my rescue? Well, knowledge and mileage. All the times I've spent studying anatomy, I know where the points are. Those, like I say, we've talked about the ulna and the acromion process and all those things. So basically, that was what my first book was about, the anatomy of style, was learning your anatomy so well that it becomes your subconscious. And so when I'm drawing, I'm not really thinking, okay, where's this part to that part? I already know that. So what I'm trying to do is, what's the rhythm between these parts? And that's the gesture. And the gesture needs to be oiled. And so I'm trying to find the rhythm of these muscles. That's what this whole study's about. And like I've said in the article, studies are notoriously stiff because we slow down to do them, and we get caught up in the minutiae of detail. And when you get in there, then you're in render hell if you're not careful. So notice as I'm going down this forearm, I'm following, the carpi ulnaris flexor. All the flexors are on the finger grip side, and all the extensors are on the top of your forearm. So as you push your fingers outwards, splay them out, then you'll feel the pressure on the top of your arm, top of your forearm. And if you pull your fingers in a fist, you'll feel the pressure underneath the arm. And so with this hand grip and that rope, the flexors are being engaged there. And you can see the rhythm here as I worked on the tendon of the triceps. And that little bulge in the inner side of the arm is the third tricep that we don't normally think about. We think of the two big ones at the top. But the other one is underneath. So most muscles have got a muscle underneath. So we usually only see two tricep bulges. But the third one underneath, or the minor one, is showing itself just on the inside. There's a slight bulge. And note how high up, and this is why the forearm often seems to be longer than the upper arm, is that the muscles of the brachioradialis are actually going up to attach on the upper end of the condyles of the humerus. So we can see a bulge popping out there beyond the ulna, and that's the condyle. That little dip inwards there on the outside is a bone. But the bulge of the brachialis muscles, the forearm muscles, come up quite high on that ulna bone to attach, on the humerus bone to attach above. So muscles on the lower arm are attaching the bone on the upper arm, which gives the impression the forearm is longer sometimes. Okay, I didn't want to get too dry with anatomy there. Like I say, refer to your anatomy, learn it well, so that what I've just said there doesn't seem, an alien conversation. As artists, as figurative artists, we want to learn that stuff well enough not to have to go, sorry, what is that name? What did you mean? And the anatomy, the names of the anatomy doesn't have to be something that you're so fluent in that it's practically you're speaking Latin. As long as you know what the shapes are, you can say the baseball bat muscles of the forearms, or instead of carpi ulnaris flexor and carpi ulnaris extensor, you can say here are the groups. You can say there's the extensor group, and not have to worry about the brachioradialis and the radialis longus. You can just push them together and say here's the group, here's the twins, or whatever you like. But you have to be at least versed in the shape of the muscles and how they interact, which is what we're doing here. So I'm using, I love these little erasers, this little pencil eraser. And it has a brush on the end of it, so brush the debris away. If you use your finger to brush the debris away, you're going to change the shape of your charcoal. So charcoal is a live thing. I like to think, but it's black and white oils, because you can actually push things around, and especially on newsprint, which is beautiful. The problem with working on cartridge paper is that it has a tooth to it, and so when you blend into it, it kind of indelibly stamps its mark into the paper. And of course, butcher's paper is going to hold that charcoal too, but not as much. Newsprint. They're both the same thing, by the way. Now, on that subject, when it comes to working with newsprint, you might say, well, it's not archival. It does last many years with care. You put it behind archival glass. But once again, if I was to draw all my drawings on a different surface, then I'd be always drawing, a finished drawing, and it would be important, and I wouldn't draw so much because I'd always be doing these longer finished drawings. Whereas newsprint is such a fast surface that I can draw, maybe 10 more drawings a day if I wanted to, not finished drawings like this, but quick drawings, than if I was working on cartridge paper, where the surface is grinding me down to a halt. Like putting chain on your tires, it's going to slow your car down. And so we don't get that fluid nature with the other surfaces. And I'm more about, once again, the long game. I'm in here for the long haul, and so every once in a while maybe I'll do a finished piece on a piece of marker paper. It's actually pretty good. It's as close as we can get to newsprint, but it's too slippy. The newsprint just has the perfect amount of grip on it, and the perfect amount of fluidity to a surface. Just fantastic. Now look at the striations I'm putting in here. We're into the minutiae now, and that's what study's about. So even though the basic shapes are these, lumps and bumps that we're familiar with, and there's that levitator scapulae going up to the, the sides of the neck, and the muscles themselves will tell you levitator is going to lift something. It's going to lift the scapula up from that point. So the scapula is being pulled upwards from there and downwards with the serratus. And the serratus is the puncher's muscles. As you push your arms forward or row or anything like that, you're using those. And when you pull back on the row, you're using your trapezius and latissimus. And so there's the arm. I just love drawing the arm. And once upon a time I didn't because it was so complicated, especially the forearm. And so we avoid what's hard. But if we do that, we'll never enjoy that thing that we dread so much, and you'll end up just drawing things that you're good at and ignoring everything else. I mean, I love drawing hands too, but we don't get much chance to do that in the life draw because there's not enough time. So I like to draw hands in a time at home during study. That's what this is here. I'm doing studies, and my word, we really have to attend to the nature of from the fingers down to the scapula. There's no more complicated part in the whole body. That's the whole business of study right there for me, and I'm going to do a workshop just on that, so bear with me on that. So learn to love the demons. Whatever you're frightened of, just embrace it. There is no fear. Be fearless, and it's the fearlessness that'll give you this gestural nature. Even with the eraser here, I'm moving all around. And on that point, you can see that I haven't actually erased anything at all. This drawing has gone in without the eraser being used to actually erase. It's used to adjust like the pencil is. If you end up having to erase such a big block of the drawing that you made an error on, you're best to start again, really, and keep it fresh. And don't think of what you've done as a lost time. It'd be lost time if you kept bulling at it and ended up with a stiff drawing anyway. So my idea is to start again, and your muscle memory is so fluid from what you've just learned anyhow that the second attempt at the drawing is going to be much more fluid and a better drawing. So I'd say I don't even think of it as an abandonment. I just say, okay, that was a good start. let's get back in there again and use what we've just learned on the drawing that really wasn't a good drawing. And here, I've made a lot of changes to the photo, and you're best not to look at the photo at this stage, because once again you'll look back and forth and go, oh, well, that's wrong, because I've made so many changes to it that you would say, if the idea was you're trying to recreate that photo, say this hasn't worked. So at some point, and this is the point I'm at now, I'm no longer looking at that photo at all. This is a new thing. But if I was to go back to that idea of this drawing again, I'd probably go in there and make it more feminine, so with more gesture in it. So my initial thought to, rough it up and make this guy a tougher guy works in one respect, but it lost the gesture in another. And the same as if you go back a few stages. This drawing is finished, 15 minutes ago. And probably definitely, I think, a better drawing 15 minutes ago. And that's the danger of render hell. So studies are a different thing. They're a different animal. I never really think of a study going to be anything that I really want to show anyone, because it's just for me to understand the anatomy better and to be more informed on the smaller things that are in these poses that we don't have time for in life draw classes. Well, not in my life draw classes anyway, where I'm always thinking about the gesture and structure. So the atelier classes are good for that. You can spend 5 weeks on a drawing and really understand everything about the anatomy. But I've looked at atelier drawings that are 5 weeks long. They're obviously not working for 5 weeks, but it could be 100 hours on a drawing or more, and not being moved at all by the drawing. It's just, to me, it's so close now to the reference that I see nothing of emotional value in them. Not always. Depends who the artist is. Some brilliant drawings by some great artists that have taken 100 hours to do. But generally, I save that for my paintings, and try and bring the fluid nature of drawing into painting. And if you consider drawing just a gateway to painting, that's okay as an idea too, but I like the idea that a drawing lives by itself and a painting lives by itself, but they're all one common hand. So I want the sensibilities of the fluidness of drawing to be in my painting. And so a lot of people abandon drawing and just become painters because they think it's a more serious business. And I think that's a mistake. I think we got to be drawing all the way as we paint. And they're all one thing, one discipline. And I've seen artists suffer from the idea that the drawing's finished now. That drawing business that was college, and now onto the serious nature of paint. A big mistake, I think. And I've seen artists do that, and their art is as stiff as it was when they were in their student days, because they never got back to the idea that the drawing and the painting work hand in hand. So they'll usually just trace out the reference and paint on top. Now you can see all the fussing I did in the background there, and just playing around really. It didn't come to much. That's okay too, because experimentation is really important to me. And so I felt that the background was competing with the foreground, and obviously, the foreground's more important. It's the figure. And so I'm going in there and trying to find some energy coming off the idea of this fellow really concentrating on his trade as a fisherman. And this is comic book stuff, really, this energy. And many fine artists have seen the benefit of that. Lichtenstein, he stole directly panels from artists, practically directly, and used all that energy on a bigger canvas scale. You can say his skill was that he saw it in a different light. He blew it up to massive proportions. And the energy that comes from those comic books, it's an abstract idea. When Spider-Man has his spider senses tingle in the comic books we saw, that is an abstract energy lines coming from his head. And that's kind of what I put in place here. So, and that's the beauty of drawing gesturally, is that you can carry it on into the abstract background. Now you can see that I've changed the rope as well. I've wrapped it around his forearm in the opposite direction, because it echoes the muscles of the forearm a little better. And also, you know, I used to work in the Navy. We never used ropes that thin to pull things. Well, we did, but usually they were attached to a bigger rope. Like you'd cast the monkey's fist line, which was a big ball on a thinner rope, and you would swing that around your head, and in a lasso fashion you throw it ashore, and that would unravel, and the guy in the docks would catch it and pull that thin rope, and it would be attached to a thicker rope. And that's the time we use those thin ropes, but not for pulling like this. So the guy in the dock might be pulling that. Because if I was to throw a giant rope that's going to pull a tanker into port, well, first of all, I wouldn't be able to throw it. You know, I wouldn't be able to swing that around. You'd have to be the Hulk. So that's the only time we use those thin ropes, really. In real life, you know, that's the kind of thickness of a rope for a fisherman there, to be pulling anything substantial, like a net in or something. And so that was one of the benefits of having worked in the Navy. N.C. Wyeth actually went into the Wild West and lived as a cowboy so that he could draw his cowboy pictures. And it really worked. You know, the authenticity of those paintings is still being revered today. Okay, guys, so there we go. That's all done. You can see the beauty of the charcoal up close here as we zoom in on it. And really, this is the thing about art, is you really have to see it in real life to appreciate it. Any art at all, even pencil drawings. I mean, it's just a beautiful thing to see in reality. And the best we can do here is this blow up on the screen. It's getting pretty close to it. And you can see the nature of every stroke there. Once the reference is out of the way, we can appreciate the drawing for what it is. It's a separate thing. It lives alone. And you can see the beautiful interaction of the muscles there, and what a joy every kind of drawing is. I mean, I love a drawing that's a little bit more unfinished than this, but even with the studies, I try to make it a beautiful thing. And I think that's a good philosophy in life as well. Whatever I do, I've always said to myself, if it's not quality, I don't want to be involved in it. So treat everything with quality, and that doesn't mean with stiffness or with reverence. You know, we don't want to get too serious about everything to the point where our drawings become stiff. But, you know, if I'm going to do something, I want to do it well. And another way to do that is to be enjoying it. Always enjoy what you're doing. You know, I've enjoyed doing this, even though it's a slower exercise than I would have liked to have done, especially coming back from that big rusty trip. But still enjoyed it and got back into it. And so every drawing is something to be loved and cherished. And if you're going to put your name to it, you want to make sure it's good. Okay, so never be a hack either, guys. You know, there's lots of hacks out there that go, you know, I'm only getting paid $200 for this, so here's a $200 effort. You know, the public don't know that. They don't go, oh, that's a bad drawing, he's just in there because it's only a $200 job. They'll just go, well, he's lost his mojo. She's, you know, used to be good and now she's not. You know, we don't want that with our art ever. No matter what the price, whatever the fee, we want to do our very best work because the work stands alone, and you can't go, that was only, you know, that was a low-paid job. It doesn't matter. You don't want to be the low-paid looking job artist because you'll start getting low-paid jobs. So be very, very wary of that, guys. You know, love your work. Love your work and do it for what it is. You know, it's your work, regardless of it being a commission or whatever it is. You know, monetarily, it doesn't matter. You got to do your best work. And ironically, you do your best work on a low-paying job, and you know, people will look at it and go, "I'm going to hire that person." And they'll give you a high-paying job based on your low-paying job because you did a great job. You know, everything evens out. So make sure you do your best and always enjoy it. That's very simple advice there from an artist who's been working a long time. Okay, and I want to work a long time more. One of the great things about being an artist is it's a long career if you look after yourself. Alright guys, on that note, look after yourselves and do your best and enjoy your art. And I'll see you next time. Good luck.